This is the Math Map Book Club, where ordinary parents encourage one another to develop an extraordinary appreciation of math. We love what we know and struggle over the unfamiliar. Through weekly conversation and exploration among friends, we can begin to enjoy ideas that seem difficult. Join our book club as we discover how math helps us to know God and to make Him known. Hello, welcome to the Math Map Book Club, where Dr. Kirsty Gilpin and myself each week talk about the Math Map with families that are using it in their classical conversations communities. And of course, we welcome anybody to come learn about the Math Map while we talk about it. And maybe that'll encourage you to join a community, because this is the beginning of the new year and enrollment is at a high. And so we just really appreciate all the efforts all of you do. And I really wanted to thank our team that stayed with us through the summer. None of these people are here because we paid them in particularly. A lot of them are just faithful to the Math Map, and they remind me of a phrase I just really wanted to share with you, and hopefully we'll start saying it a whole lot. It's that one of the reasons I love homeschooling parents is because they serve their purpose rather than their weaknesses. And these people are maybe weak in math, but they know their purpose is to become better at it so they can know God and make Him known. So everybody's welcome. And I just really appreciate Kirsty for being such a leader. All right, take it away.
All right, let me make sure that I am clicking on the right window. We are here looking at lesson number 2 this week, number notation. And we are talking about the Math Map at home. So if you didn't watch last week, which may have been felt a little bit like you were drinking from the fire hose, because we told you everything you could do every week. This week, we're going to go much more gently and really just look at 1 or 2 things you could do each week to try to model what that would look like to take this smorgasbord and then pick and choose as you work through the year what you're going to do with that. So every week we are going to start by encouraging us to use our flashcards. And one of the things, I think I actually need to get the images of the other flashcards since they actually went on sale this year. So I'll be adding that next week. But I wanted to start just with a few of our flashcard decks to really encourage you not to be overwhelmed with all of them. Last week, we talked about how important it is to first read the flashcards together, and don't feel like you have to jump right into drilling, but read the flashcards together. The other thing we talked about last week was celebrating the cards that are mastered. Sometimes it's tempting to put those cards aside and only focus on the ones that are perhaps causing us to stumble or to struggle. But by keeping some of those cards in, you're going to actually help your students to gain confidence, because they're going to encounter the cards that they do know. So not everything is hard. This week, a couple of ideas that I thought I would share with you were using multiple decks at once, right? So that you don't have to do addition, then multiplication, and then notations, that you can pick and choose and make your own flashcard deck. So depending on your students, maybe if you have digit students, maybe you're going to practice your addition facts through the 8s or the 9s, and your multiplication facts through the 9s instead of all the way through the 15s. So maybe you start by pulling out just a few of those addition and multiplication facts. Maybe you are going to work in a few of the notations. So you can use all of these decks that we've created. And although we've put them into these discrete boxes, you can mix those up and use them how best is going to serve your students. The other thing that you could do is review the lesson with your students by asking them which are the flashcards that we should practice, right? So maybe at the end of the week, one of the things that you could do is look back on the lesson and go, okay, what are some things we need to practice? Are there some flashcards we should pull out here so that we can review these ideas next week? And so that's a way that you can review the lesson while still reviewing those concepts by, again, choosing those flashcards. Does anybody have any ideas that they brought this week related to flashcards that they'd like to share?
I do
I
want
just
to
want to
fight
say
that.
I appreciate Bab's comment about being OCD and having to do one deck at a time. And I think that's the thing that homeschooling moms tell me over and over again we've done is we've made them realize that they can be their own boss. They can be free. So same with your kids. You know, one of the great games is to play 52 card pickup and just in this case 208 card pickup and just throw them in the air and then tell them to do it, do the first 10 they get to or whatever as they pick them up.
I was thinking too, fighting the urge to make a chart of things to review in each booklet because I feel like I've seen that. Like people are saying, oh, we need to focus on these flashcards with lesson 2 or these flashcards with booklet 3. And I think the way you described it would be better to let the kids kind of get involved in that. Okay, what do you think? Or even just looking at it together and not saying, let's only focus on these 4 flashcards because I know they're in the booklet. So I feel like it's like I think I don't know, maybe we're feeling pressured to like make something that is straightforward to say, let's focus on these 4 cards when we're going to see these notations over and over again. So you don't want to just pick out 4 cards and only do that, like make a spreadsheet. You know what I'm saying? And so I think I've seen people doing that. And I think eventually they stop because they realize that it's not really fruitful because the notations are going to be over and over again. So I liked what you said about like going through the lesson and then saying, oh, there were 4 or 5 that were really difficult for us. Let's pull those out and make sure we review them.
Yeah, the thing is, it's always been a balance for me to appreciate that like here we went to all this work to make these flashcards and to say just use them and use them like flashcards. They're not the curriculum, they're flashcards. But we are all made in God's image and we're recreators naturally. So one of the ways people are recreators of things they like is they make them over again, make their own flashcards. But another way they do that is to organize them differently. So using a spreadsheet or a box or the day of the week. And so it's really natural for us to want to have things ordered and organized. And that isn't a very adult thing. Children are quite happy with chaos and they do not learn linearly or like a spreadsheet. And so we adults sometimes have to remember to, as we're recreating, we're doing it for us, not for our children. Our children are perfectly happy having things out of order.
Leigh, I like what you just said there about being a recreator, because one thing that I remember from my Challenge A directing days was the emphasis we put on the students creating their own flashcards. And
Mhm.
so we've done this great thing. We've made these beautiful flashcards. We've pulled out what we think is helpful grammar, certainly not all of the grammar, but grammar that we think would be helpful. And we've we've produced this, so that effort of creating the flashcards may feel like it's not necessary, but I love to think about the fact that our students, if they're engaged in choosing the flashcards to review, it's that same type of process as creating a flashcard, because they have to say, I need to know this. And I'm fortunate because there's already a flashcard made, so I'm going to use that flashcard. But it's possible that they might say, there's something I need to know, and there's no flashcard for this, so I'm going to make a flashcard. And so for our youngest students, playing 52 card pickup, reading the cards, becoming familiar, for our youngest students, that's a great strategy. For our older students, including them in that process, I think helps them to make that learning really their own.
I think something we've seen at home too is when we learn the flashcards and then it comes up like 3 or 4 lessons down the road, not necessarily, there's a different joy and in that recognition. Like we've seen that. And now we know what that is. And if we hadn't done our flashcard work, we wouldn't know what this is. And I think if we get too organized and like orderly about it, we miss that part. And I think that's the hard part to help people understand about the math map, is that we're trying to like restore this joy and wonder to math. And for us, the flashcards has helped do that.
That's great, Nina. That reminds me of when we lived in Florida. We were blessed to go to Disney World with some regularity. That Spaceship Earth was such a fun ride because there was this discovery of things that they learned in CC in our timeline cards. And then this ride took you on the timeline. And so my children loved that ride for that very reason, because of the familiarity of things they'd already studied. So I think that's a great thing to bring up. Thank you. So once we've done our flashcards, we're going to talk about our cover. And so last week I gave you some ideas of how to use our skills of memoria using our names. This week I've given some questions, suggestions for how you could use our common topics. I kept wanting to say canons, but our common topics. So we have our 5 common topics of definition, comparison, circumstance, relationships, and authority. And even our younger students can still define and compare and talk about circumstance, relationship, and authority. So these are great questions. Again, you don't have to use all of them every week, but I like to remember that we are not here to necessarily learn math. We will learn math, but our homeschooling journey is about learning how to learn so that our children are really equipped for whatever God has for them. And so when we practice the common topics, when we practice the canons of rhetorics, when we practice our core habits, we are setting them up for that lifetime of learning. So there's no right answers, but these are some good questions that you could think about as you look at this cover. You could ask your students what needs to be defined. So for our younger students or our less experienced students, there may be some words that are unfamiliar and they want to know what those words mean. So that's always a great question, is to challenge them and say, what words do you need to have defined? If we have more experienced students, we could ask them if there's some words that seem familiar this year that they remember not knowing last year. So now they can define them. What are those definitions? Notice the comparison question that I gave you really isn't mathematical, but it's getting into the art. And I'm saying we can compare these apple pickers, right? And how might they be exhibiting individual gifts from God? So remember, our goal is to see the unseen. So when we look at a picture, how could we use comparison to see something unseen? And how could that teach us something about God or about ourselves? We can always ask our students about the dimensional circumstance. So that's asking them to look in that top left corner where it says 0D and it has the dot, right, for the point. We can always ask them, what's the dimensional circumstance of this booklet topic? Great relationship question with things that grow, right, is what are the relationships that are illustrated by an apple tree? What came first? What's the order? Is there a cycle to an apple tree, that we had a seed, and from that seed we got roots and a stem and then leaves and then fruit, and then the fruit fall and decompose and we get a seed, and that seed can bring another tree. So there's a beautiful rhythm that we can talk about there in that order and that relationship that might be illustrated by an apple tree. And then a way we can pull in authority is by looking at a quotation by Richard Swenson, who said that nothingness obeys his voice. Now, who is his voice? What does that mean, that God is an authority over nothingness? Does anybody else have something from the covers or a testimony from a conversation they've had at home that they would like to share?
I just wanted to make a comment about the skills, because we just had challenge 4 orientation last night, and she was talking about how they're going to be leading seminar by the skills, and she showed us the 15 skills in the guide and she's talking through it. And I just thought, our kids, they've been doing it in community, but I feel like the kids now who are going to be practicing using the math map will have a little more practice. I feel like this is I don't know if it's easier, but I feel like it's easier to talk about the art with all the skills than maybe some of the other topics that we try to use them with. And so it was just like full circle for me, seeing how now they're going to be leading their class using these skills, where all along we've been training them on how to use their skills. So I'm excited to see. I want to try to sit in on a couple of classes with Challenge 4 and just, see the fruit, see the result of what all those all those years of kind of pouring into them do. So I'm glad that we're kind of going over this, especially challenge. Well, we were starting in challenge A, but the kids who were using the math map at home, I mean, they could be 4, 5, 6, 7, right?
Over the years, the contribution to the conversation that's in the front cover of this booklet has really been a blessing in class and at home, especially further down where it talks about each individual point and what that art would look like if that point was missing. And so just that each of us are important, and that the one dot there that looks like maybe it doesn't match all the other dots. So this art it's just been a really beautiful early in the year piece to discuss.
Thanks, Jill. I love that testimony.
Just a couple of things I remember kids saying about this particular art, and I would have probably never seen these two things. One is that they called the lady who was standing there lazy because she was not picking any apples. She was like the supervisor. And then they also said that the tree trunk was a backwards number 7. And I don't know that I would have gotten either one of those. I don't know that I would have picked those two things out. I definitely wouldn't have called that lady lazy, because I probably am the supervisor in some of those instances, telling everybody what to do. But she actually does have 2 baskets beside her. So that doesn't necessarily mean she wasn't picking apples just at that moment that this was drawn or painted.
I think that's a great conversation when we look at that. And I think maybe that's why God led me to that question about their individual gifts. And that sometimes the way that one person exercises their gifts may not look as productive, and we may be tempted to label that as lazy. But if somebody is pursuing using their gifts in the service of God, then there's nothing lazy about it. And so we've had that conversation that laziness doesn't mean a time of rest or contemplation.
Somebody
So
had a
as
question in the
we,
chat, Kirsty.
yeah,
There's a question in the chat about how we could use the Travelogue.
so the Travelogue is not designed for in community necessarily. But it is something that may be helpful at home. So families certainly could read the Travelogue and get some more ideas for their conversation. I've had some people say that they've used it as sort of part of their devotional time as they're preparing for the math map. There may be some pieces of it that if as a tutor or a director you read that, you may want to say, oh, I want to use that in community. But with remembering that we're talking this year about our at-home folks, right? As a mom or a dad, that may be something that you want to read at the beginning of the week or read at the end of the week and say, how did this help you understand? Even if you read it at the beginning and the end of the week, or that contribution to the conversation at the beginning and the end of the week, you could ask your students, okay, so here we've read it. Do you have any thoughts about what you're expecting? And then you get to the end and you read it and you say, well, what makes more sense to you now? What did you learn this week that maybe illuminates some of the ideas that were shared in the Travelogue or that contribution to the conversation?
So I'd like to add, Kirsty, because the travelogue is really quite good. You did a good job. You wrote it, not me. You got 3 pieces. You've got the travel log, which like you can break them up and do exactly what Kirsty said. That's fine. But you also might just want to read all 30 of them, because it was Kirsty's way of telling us how all the dimensions and all the lessons work together. So as a parent, it might give you a great overview the first week if you read all of them. So you have that piece. Then you have the conversation, which is directed exactly to the, art of that week and the subject that it relates to. So I guess those are really just 2 pieces. The third piece I was thinking of was this map, but I misspoke. So 2 pieces. There's 2 ways to look at it. So they don't have to be done separately.
Thanks, Leigh.
Hmm?
So on our first day at home, we encourage everybody to then, after you've talked about the cover, to take a look at the map and remember that our goal is to each week look and identify where we are on the map. So we want our students to see the dimension that we're in and the topic that goes along with that, as well as reviewing which domain they're in, so they can actually trace their journey and know where they are. Again, to emphasize the difference between the foundations level domains and the challenge level domains, our foundations level domains have an outline for at home, where our challenge level domains have some examples for things students might take notes on. And then that page is intentionally left blank for the majority of the lesson so that students can use that in community to take notes or at home to take notes. As a parent, you can certainly choose one of these pages to pull out and take notes each week. So you might want to make little notes on one of your math maps and say, this year we did a great job. We did all 16 pages. Or you might say, this year we only did the flashcards. I need to make sure I revisit this next year. And so you end up building a little record for yourself with just a few words of what you got done. And then the next year, you can always go back and review that and say, oh gosh, we didn't talk about transformations at all last week. That's when John broke his ankle and we didn't do any math. So this year, I'm going to make sure that we spend some time with the transformations lessons. So that's just another way that you can use the math map independently of talking about it each week, but as a parent, using that as a way to keep track of what went well and maybe what you'd like to revisit the next year.
So I'd like to add one of the ways that I use all table of contents. So this is what this is, a table of contents. So just think about the biblical table of contents. When you look at the books and the Old Testament versus the New Testament, and you go, that's right, Ruth's only 6 pages long versus Psalm 119 all by itself is 3 pages long. Like, it gives you an overview of where you've been, how you tackled it, how you could tackle it later. And that's what the whole point of this math map is. It's just to help you know that math truly is orderly, but you can tackle it backwards, forwards, in between, just like we do when we read scripture. But having a table of contents and knowing that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are always in the same order helps me to build, and helps all of us to build our memoria about everything that's in the Bible.
It's the pegs, right, Leigh? I just remember that from my very early days in CC, Leigh describing this pegboard and hammering in those pegs. And then I always think of, I think it was at Sturbridge Village in Massachusetts, there's a pegboard and they would have all the candles that were hung from it. So that's why I don't know that that's necessarily, candles really have anything to do with our memoria, but that's the image that always comes to mind is these candles that have been hung on these pegboards. And if you think about candles illumine things, right? We can think about us, the light is growing as we add more and more to these pegs and make those connections. And that brings us, right? So notice again, if you are fairly new to this, we started with some flashcard time. We talked about our cover. We looked to see where we were on the math map. And just now we're getting to our lesson pages. So every week, we're just going to remember that there is an intentional mapping from domain to domain. If you look these 3 pages here, and I'm going to show you another screen, you can match and see where those boxes have corresponding ideas and they also have similar concepts and similar exercises for our students to work through. We really want to encourage you to experiment with different strategies to see what fits your family's needs best and allow your students to compare those domains. So one strategy for this week, if you remember last week, I said we're going to try and share some different strategies each week. So you're encouraged to come back. We're not going to give everything all in one week. But one strategy is to start by scaffolding for your older students. If you have a challenge A or challenge B student who maybe still needs a little bit of scaffolding, a little bit of support, especially at the beginning of the academic year, you may, after you've had your conversation together, send them off with their booklets and say, go trace, copy, color, on your booklets. And I'm going to work through pages 1 through 4 with that older student, especially on day 1, to help get them set up, to model for them what it means to pull from my own memoria, to perhaps use the solutions pages if I need to use the chart pages if I need to, that I can model for them reading the instructions. That last year, that was, I think, probably the one takeaway that a lot of us seemed to get from our book club last year, was how important it was to read the instructions, because so often we think that we're being asked to do more than we really are. So by scaffolding for that older student, supporting them for those first few weeks to really help them to understand how to approach these pages independently, that's one strategy. And we're going to talk about other strategies in other weeks, but I just wanted to give you that one this week as we're seeing challenge communities getting started. The goal is not necessarily to go through all of the math on all of the pages. That would be far more than we would fit into our hour. But each week I do want to show you the 3 pages, the 3 different domains that we're looking at this year together, so that you can see how that mapping works. And so that if you have some specific questions, you can ask those. So does anybody have any questions from lesson 2, page 1, that jump out at them that they might like to ask? All right. So looking at day 2, now remember, we're going to start our day by drilling our flashcards. And then on day 2, we're going to look at our I² invention page. So this is the page, again, where there is, admittedly, a lot of math ideas here, but the goal for the I² invention page is to practice the 5 common topics of invention. So when we look at a page like this, we don't have to practice all 5 topics every week. We could pick one topic and use it a little bit more in depth. So for this week, I thought about the topic of definition. And if you remember last week, I said that there's really almost 3 levels of definition. First, there's looking up the definition. So what word do I not know? And where can I go and look that up? A glossary is a great resource for looking up words that are in the math map, where you're going to find definitions that were written to complement the math map. They are intentionally different to definitions that are in the charts. There may be some commonalities, but we've really worked hard to write definitions that are different in the glossary, so that if a student or a parent looks at the chart and doesn't really know how to decipher that definition, by going to the glossary, they'll get it in a different format. We have a little bit more room, so we usually use a few more words and illustrations to help understand what those words mean. So that's our first definition skill, is being able to identify an unfamiliar word and then look that word up. The next skill of definition would be defining from our own memoria. So for students who have a year or 2 or 3 working through the math map, or who have worked through another math curriculum and feel that they have a good handle on their memoria, that would be a great time to look at some words and ask your student, well, what does this word mean? Do you know what this word means? And so maybe help them to identify where they think they're confident, and they are, or to find things where they think they're confident and maybe it's a little bit of overconfidence, and then going back and to that other skill of looking that up. And then for our older students who are becoming, I don't want to use the word masters, but who are becoming a lot more skilled in that practice of definition, is that idea of defining by class, of saying that 0, for example, we can talk about that 0 belongs to the class of numbers that are represented by numerals. But what makes 0 different from every other number is that 0 represents when there's nothing there. So we can talk about how a word fits into one class and then is differentiated. And so that's more dialectic skill of definition, where we're using other things that we know in order to learn about that new idea. We can certainly talk about the math ideas that are on these pages, but we really want to emphasize and encourage families that these pages are here to practice those common topics of invention. And that's great for all of our students, for our young students, for our old students, just as Babs was saying, how important those skills are. So does anybody have anything from this page that they'd like to talk about? Any questions about the math or questions about definition?
This is a good page to practice what you were talking about earlier with the flashcards, you know, trying to find, like, matching them up because there's a couple of them in there. My kids always like the diagrams and talking about the difference between the Euler diagram and the Venn diagram, because sometimes they've seen these before in different scenarios. So I think they like talking about what makes them the same and what makes them different.
So I think I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. So I know I've been listening to a lot of this for a long time, but this is the first time it's become clear to me that this page is not about helping the kids solve any of the problems that are in the booklet. Am I right about that?
Yes and no. So Leigh, I don't want to say that there's nothing of mathematical value here, because obviously there is. And Leigh worked really hard to pull ideas together. Oftentimes on the invention page, she may pull ideas that are related from multiple dimensions. And on the Memoria page, she may take things that we've looked at in a grammarian way with flashcards, and we're trying to put it into a context. So there is a math value. These pages can certainly help our students. They can be a reference for our students because they're pulling a subset of information, usually from the charts, sometimes from the lessons. It's a little bit more simple in its layout than the charts are. So there's certainly a worthwhile resource for the math, but they're not intended for a parent or a tutor to look at this and then try to teach the math from these pages. They're a great reference, and in practicing our skills with these pages, we're going to learn more about the math ideas that are represented here. But I really emphasize that they're here to practice those common topics of invention, because I don't want anybody to look at these and think they have to teach these ideas, because that is not the goal for those pages. Does that help clarify that, Nicole?
I think so. And the I really hate to ask this question again, because I feel like I and others have asked it again, but I understand why the charts repeat themselves every domain, but having this new kind of fresh understanding, can you help me understand why these pages that are a subset of the charts don't change and pick something else on the chart to emphasize at every domain?
Can I explain, Kirsty, and then you can clean me
Absolutely.
up? So you look at this Venn versus Euler diagram. This is a really good example as to why these exist. When Kirsty made the charts, she explained the either Venn or Euler that were used in that lesson. But she didn't have the space to show you all the various forms of Eulers and all the various forms of Venn. So the first or second time you go through these lessons, say you do naturals and then you do integers, you don't even know at that point that there's all these kinds of Eulers and Venns. Well, maybe the third or fourth year you go, wait a minute, where's the one picture that shows me all of them? Here it is. But you don't always know how to use these until you've been in the map for a few years, because it summarizes.
Ah, okay. 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 Thank you. That helps a lot.
They're
Okay.
good summary pages for us at home too.
Yeah.
Kind of, it's still early in the week, it's day 2. And it gives me a chance to see what we still need to work on from the previous year and what that, because the chart, there's a lot in the chart. There's a lot they're not going to know in the chart from a year or 2 or 3, and it can be a little overwhelming. But to look at this and they can say, oh, I do remember these things from last year, or I still haven't retained this, and we can go find it in the chart.
And it's also a great reminder that those skills transcend the domains, that we can, every year, if we practice definition, we're going to define something different on the page. If we practice comparison, we're going to compare something different on the page. And so it's another way to see how our students are growing in the application of those skills, because we're looking at the same material, but we're applying the skills in a little different way.
Let me add one more thing too. Okay, so it's called the math map for a reason. So the I-2 page is the math map. You think of that as latitude and longitude. Then think of Kirsty's charts as the map of the country you're visiting, right? The subject you're visiting. But there's a lot on that map. So maybe you want to know where the art museums are, or maybe you want to know where the sporting events are. Well, think of these invention and memoria pages like that. They're like this special where it's summarized and it's only a couple of topics, not all of the things you possibly could know about that country.
So then in thinking about that, actually, not only then are the charts valuable in accumulating and using a reference, but so are the invention and memoria pages.
My hope is that these pages would become more familiar earlier because the print's bigger, the pictures are bigger, they're summative, knowing that the charts really were more for that challenge for the parent, and where the challenge 3-4 students able to go, my knowledge is comprehensive. I understand all the things Dr. Gilpin has done, versus these are little bites. Like these are just the coffee shops, not the whole academic subject like the charts are.
I
still
have
feel like
a
that-
quick question.
Okay.
Yes.
I am new to Math Map everything. And so I'm looking at this page. It does say I-2 at the bottom. And then
Yes.
next to it is I-3. And you guys are speaking different language to me. So day 2 is I-2 page.
Yes.
And you're opening up after flashcards to this page, and you're doing what with the student? Just reading the boxes and the circles?
You can, or really you're going to open up to this page and you're going to practice your common topics. So you're going to pick one of your common topics or a couple of your common topics and practice with your student. So depending on the age of your student, you might look at this page with your student and you might read maybe the headlines like dimension coordinate systems. And you might say to your student, do you know what those words mean? And if they do, that's great. If they don't, then you go and look it up and you say, okay, well, let's look up the word dimension and see what that means. Let's look up the word coordinate system and see what that means. And so that's using that in that common topic of definition on this page, not necessarily to learn the ideas that are on this page, but to practice what it means to define terms. So when you look at this page as a parent, you don't have to do the whole page. You don't have to look at everything on the page. If you are working with your student to understand what definition means, you might just pick 1 or 2 words from this page that you want to define for your student. And the joy of these pages repeating next year is that next year, maybe with a slightly older student, you might define more terms, or you might define and compare terms on this page. But the goal is really to provide a place for you as a parent to model or teach your students how to use those common topics of invention. And so remember, those are definition, comparison, circumstance, relationship, and authority. Does that help?
I think that's what I'm most foreign with, because I've never applied the 5 common topics. I've been in CC for 8 years, but I've never have applied those 5 to any of my students. So, new challenge, yes. Doable, sure. Am I at the grammar stage of it all? Absolutely.
Sounds like you've
that's
already won. Alec, it sounds like you already won. Just keep doing what you're doing. The fact that you could describe that, you're wonderful.
And that's exactly what this page is for. It is for that grammarian in the common topics. And so just if you come every week, we're going to give you another suggestion for how to use the common topics. So if you just for lesson 2 with your students, if you just choose 1 or 2 words or ask them to choose 1 or 2 words from that page to define, you have accomplished the goal for this week. It is that simple.
Okay, thank you. I guess I'll make a larger copy of the 5 common topics and put it in every week for Math Map.
So after you've done that on day 2 and you've practiced your common topics, then we are looking at our lesson pages. And I just want to point out that when we talk about these skills of learning, we're practicing those on the I squared and the I cubed pages. We're practicing those on our cover. We're practicing them there so that we can use it here in our lesson pages. There's not a divorce between the rest of the math map and practicing those skills of learning, and then you get to the lesson pages and now it's real math. You're still supposed to be using those skills of learning when you get to the lesson pages. One thing that is really tempting for all of us to do is to slip from being a classicalist into being a didactic teacher. And we've noticed this, right? That there's a lot of people who want to teach it. They want a video. They want somebody to sit down and explain these ideas to their students. When we know that the classicalist looks at this page and says, okay, what are the things that I need? What are the words I need to know? What do I need to be able to name? And then if I've named it, can I define it? What are some things I need to add to my memoria? Or what are some things I already know that I can pull from? What do I need to attend to really carefully? And remember, we just said a few minutes ago that we need to attend carefully to the instructions. So when we come into these lesson pages, we really want to encourage everybody to continue, right, to bring in those skills of learning so that we're teaching our students how to approach these lesson pages as a classicalist would, right? By attending and naming and memorizing where we need to. Maybe if you look on the integers page down at the bottom right, we have our mono, bino, trino, rhino, right? There's a little joke there, right? So there's a great thing we can express there with our children, right? Or maybe we look here and we see that our ordinal numbers 1st through 4th are attached to seasons. So maybe we could story tell. That kind of goes away with our older students, but if we have all of our students together at the table, this is an opportunity where we could have our students looking at the top. Our older students look at the top and they see those ordinal words. Our younger students see those ordinal words connected with a season. And now we can help our students work together to understand what that means where we say ordinal words, right? That it's putting things in order because we're comparing. And then if we use storytelling along with that, that might help our students to remember that order. Ordinal means order. Are there any questions that you have about these lesson pages?
Something I think would just be fun to do is to ask the student, like, when is a number not a number? So for instance, when is like maybe 8.0, which looks like a decimal, but its value is actually a natural or even an integer, to help them to see with these numbers on this page here, these pages you're showing us, how do they fit into the domain and that Euler's diagram that was on page 1, as well as the math map page.
It's a great reminder that you can use the textbook and not let the textbook use you. That's one of my favorite Leigh quotes, right? Is that there are these great lesson pages here that you can just have your students read the instructions and do them. But as you, the parent, perhaps not in your first year, but you, the parent, gains more confidence in your own math knowledge, you might look at these pages and say, we're going to use them in a different way. We talked early on about that freedom to tailor the curriculum, and you can do that with these lesson pages too, just like Leigh was giving you a great example of using those numbers and then connecting that to the idea of the Euler diagrams. So moving on to day 3, you can continue to practice with your flashcards. You can also bring in some quick flip arithmetic games. And then the extra page that we would encourage you to look at today is the I-cubed Memoria and arrangement page. Again, one of the things that Leigh has tried to do with this page in general is to take ideas that students may see in discrete ways with flashcards and then put those ideas into context. So you may see different examples or other ideas, but it's looking at those ideas in context. So if we were looking at our core habits of Memoria, you could just practice naming one week, and you could ask your students, what can you name on this page? How do we know what we are naming, right? What on here is a name? And so just helping our students to see, for example, right, that these are names, right? These name this place is the 100 millions, that this is the 10 millions. So we can, there's so much on this page that we could name. We could name the 128ths and the 64ths or the 27s. So sometimes our students may need our help just in looking at the information and going, I don't know what a name is, right? And so helping them to look at the arrangement and determine what is it that is being named, right? And what are the names? So again, using this page as a way to practice those core habits of Memoria, and then helping our students to look at a chart or a diagram or a table and figure out what is it that's in that is a name. And then we would do our lesson pages. And so notice that we continue to see that mapping from domain to domain, where there's similar ideas, but done at a domain appropriate level. So on day 3, we're going to be looking at place value, understanding how we build numbers. Does anybody have any questions from these pages?
I do have a question.
Sure.
You said do 4 lessons a day, and now we're on page 3 for day 3, page 3, but where's the 4 lessons on page 3 for day 3?
Sure. So on day 1, if I had done, so I decided to pull this out this way, and I'm sort of hiding a strategy here, is that one strategy you might do is on day 1, talk about pages 1, 5, 9, and 13. They're all going to be very, very similar. And then on day 2, I could talk about 2, 6, 10, and 14. Again, very similar. On day 3, 3, 7, 11, and 15. And day 4, 4, 8, 12, and 16. I could have done pages 1 through 4, 5 through 8, and so on. For the purpose of the book club, it made sense to pull it out and do the first 4 pages over the course of those 3 days. But at home, you can reorder this however you would like to. And it may be that at home you do all 16 pages and your kids get all of it done. It may be at home that you get 8 pages done, or you decide you're going to spend more time playing games and you do 4 pages this year. There really is almost an infinite number of ways that you can organize and tailor the curriculum. For the purpose of the book club, this made sense to me to look at the first 4 pages because they're really representative of the other 12 pages that are in the curriculum. Does that help?
Yes, thank you very much.
Alex, I have to tell you, I really appreciate your question because we've been doing this for several years and we have a lot of people who are on the book club who have been with us for several years. And so we have perhaps forgotten what it's like to look at this with a fresh set of eyes. So just know that your questions are so welcome because if you have the question, I'm sure somebody else does, and I'm glad we have the opportunity to answer it.
And some of us might be scared to ask it. So it's good that we have a voice.
And so then that takes us to day 4. We have games on the back covers. We have created some YouTube videos that go along with those games. We talked about those over the summer. So if you're looking for a little bit more instruction or help with those games, I certainly would encourage you to go and watch those. Then the page that we have here for the careful calculations is, I'm going to move off from this, but this week I just wanted to define careful and calculations one more time so that we know that when we're talking about being careful, our goal is to calculate accurately, attending to the units and the operations and other important details. Leigh has been, I'm trying to think of the right term, but I cannot imagine anybody who has been more diligent to attending to units as she has created these lessons. She has made sure that we practice units over and over and over again. As a pure math person, I have tended to want to just ignore the units where they were the same and say, it doesn't matter, they're just numbers. And Leigh has always pulled us back. And I think that's her engineering background and say, no, we have to have the units and they have to cancel and they have to work out. So when I say that it's important to attend to units on these pages, I really do mean that understanding what the units are and attending is a skill that is going to help your students. And then also just reiterating that we are looking at some key calculations in general. We're looking at key calculations on this page that are related to the lesson. We are not going to review the entire lesson. And so while you may want to use this page as a quiz to provide some accountability to your students, it's not going to be a comprehensive assessment. And so we have some great book club sessions on assessment. We'll talk about assessment more when we get to lessons 15 and 30. But I just want to caution you because we've heard people who have said, hey, start with the careful calculations. That's what you need to know. And that is a poor practice. And so I really want to encourage you to use this appropriately. At the end of the week, it's a great way to review and look at some of the calculations that may have been common to the week. And then
It's kind of the right time, but we're out of time, but I think we should say, one of the complaints we've had is we didn't put the answers, the solutions to the careful calculations in the booklet in case a parent wanted to treat it as a quiz or assessment. And now in our new edition, we have found a place within the booklets so you don't have to go to the companion every time for the answers. So that's going to be a new feature coming up.
thanks, Leigh. Yeah, and that's a great reminder that this is a curriculum that is still being developed. We've joked that if you remember your first cell phone, those of us who are a little bit older, It was not the sleek gadget that does everything that we all carry around now. That things really do improve greatly and dramatically over time. And so Leigh is still learning, and she is listening to feedback all the time in order to make the math map be all that God intends for it to be. So day 4, we're looking at sets. Does anybody have any questions from these pages that they'd like to talk about? So I will every week, I'm going to put these same 4 pages, not from lesson 2, but the first 4 pages of the lesson up. So if you are planning to come and you want to look ahead and see if you have questions, feel free to bring those. And as always, we will end our time with questions that maybe aren't related to the lesson. So there'll always be a chance for you to ask your questions. It doesn't have to be on those pages. Just a reminder that we are here to support you. Again, I know I say this every week, but every week I am just struck again with gratitude for the fact that Classical Conversations, Leigh and her family, and CCMM are investing not just in the development of the math map and the related materials, but in supporting families and making, an hour of Leigh's time every week she is giving to families here on the book club. It was really kind of mind-blowing. I just don't know of any other product, any other curriculum, anything where you have that kind of access and willingness to answer your questions. So I really encourage you to continue coming, to bring your questions, and to invite your friends. Next week, we will be looking at lesson 3. Again, how we could work through this at home, continuing to incorporate other strategies. And that brings us to our time for questions. And so I thank everybody for being here, and I am happy to answer questions if you have them.
There's one in the chat, Kirsty. If you aren't confident in your math abilities, would you start everyone at a younger level? And she said she felt like she researched a lot this week.
I don't think I would necessarily start everybody at a younger level if I wasn't confident, because you don't have to know everything about math in order to lead your students through the math map. When we think about ourselves being a lead learner, where we want to lead our students is in using those skills of learning. So if we sit down with our students and they know more than us, have them teach you, or work together to say, okay, let's look at this page. What's familiar to you? What's some things you know? I'm going to identify the things that I know. Maybe it's not a lot. Maybe it's just that we can read the English, and that's okay. Maybe we can read the numbers, and that's okay. So let's start there together, and then let's pick something that's unfamiliar and see if we could define that. Could we pick something that's unfamiliar and compare it to something else? What are some things that we maybe want to attend to on this page, right? And so using those skills as a parent, my job is to ask those questions and encourage my students to use those skills so that they are having the opportunity to build up their grammar, to build their knowledge. So encouraging them to do flashcards, right? And memorizing things that we see they need to memorize, perhaps on that memoria and arrangement page. And then again, asking those questions so that I'm pushing them to develop their understanding. Once they've started to build up some knowledge, how can they connect that in order to build understanding? So I want parents to feel like you don't have to be an expert. Yes, Leigh, please.
Yeah. No, I agree with everything you said, and it made me think of an analogy that we all have common sense in, that are at home educating our children when it comes to teaching them to read. So when they're a new reader, we don't say, well, you read at a first grade level, so no practicing kindergarten books. I don't want you to get any faster, and I'm not going to read to you. My books I read to you are above first grade. We would never do that. in reading. We have our kids do all levels all the time, every day. And that's the same thing we need to do with our Bible studies. We're ahead and we're behind and we're right at where the Holy Spirit wants us to be. And it's the same with our math studies. And so the part I reiterate about what Christy said is you may not want to go to a narrower domain because you recognize maybe we just need to do the flashcards a little bit more. But there may come a time where you go, you know what, I do need a narrower domain. And it's okay. No one's ahead or behind. You're using the resource that makes it so that by the time you've gone through this a few years, you actually believe there's order to the universe and you can explain that there's order to the universe. And you maybe got the 5 common topics practiced and maybe you got to learn how to calculate some, right? Our goals are like so factory oriented instead of what is this universe? What does the universe have to offer us? And how do we learn to study all of its gifts? So do it on all levels.
Babs, Babs is always saying that she was chosen for this because she feels like she was where a lot of moms were, that she was not confident in her math ability. And she has come so far just in her own confidence. She's applied the skills of learning and she's taught herself. So I'm just always so proud of Babs. But I don't know if Babs has anything she'd like to share to encourage moms who feel like maybe they're not at the forefront of mathematics just yet.
I mean, I think just being willing to be the learner, not because I think that's hard for us as adults is that we don't know more than our kids. And I think if we can just accept that, then it'll go a lot easier and accept that we're going to keep learning. I mean, I still don't know it all. This is what, year 7 in the math map, and I still don't know it all. I know enough to have conversations with my kids about it. I know how to, I love, like Shauna calls it, seek and find, like if there's blanks, then we're going to look for the answer together. And so, I think accepting the fact that I don't have to know all of this in order to teach my kids it was hard for me to kind of accept. But I think once you do that, then it opens you up. You're like, oh, wow, I can learn anything, right? And so you're modeling for your students that you're still learning at whatever age you are and that you can do hard things, right? I don't have to know it all in order to keep going. So I say this all the time that I've learned more about math in the last 6 years than I did when I was in school. And there's many different reasons for that, right? I mean, I'm an adult, so I want to learn it now, whereas maybe I didn't want to learn it when I was in school. But there's different reasons, and the repetition, right? Doing the same concepts over and over again helps to kind of reinstill those things in your mind. So yes, definitely I'm a testament. Like if I can do it, anybody can do it. It's really approachable. So for sure.
Alex.
Hi, thank you. I'm wondering if I should get Math Map started for all 4 of my students on the same year because I'm new to it this year. So should we start it all? You're shaking your head. Yes, I should start it all together.
The thing is, you can start it together. How old are the children? Like, what's the oldest and youngest?
Youngest is 4 years old, oldest is 12. So I'm starting challenge
Yeah.
A with Math Maps with the 12-year-old.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what might be good is at home to do naturals with everybody because you're the parent, you're the student, you're the best and the biggest student in the household right now. But meanwhile, and then after your naturals conversations, done some of the work with all of them, then help your challenge A student finish their assignments for that week. So that, so they feel like they are confident when they get to the seminar. But what they're going to find is probably the better conversations they have is in doing the naturals.
Okay. Do I buy 3 naturals for my younger students and then just keep the complex for the 12-year-old?
Well, yeah, if I want to make the most money, do that. But but you don't have to. You might want to just have your 4-year-old nearby and color a few of the pages. Right? You don't need to go get a whole curriculum for that one.
So Alex, I just want to let you know that you may want to email the math map at classicalconversations.com. They can help give you which resources you could buy and which resources are currently available for download on CC Connected, because right now, not everything is available. Not all the domains are available. So they may be able to help you to better assess what you could download from the companion and what you might want to buy. But I'm just going to tell you that I think that if you started everybody this year together, you have the opportunity to do what we're doing this week, where you see those different domains are going to have different approaches to the same concept. And so your Challenge A student might learn from your 4-year-old, believe it or not, by having all of them sitting at the table together. And it's going to be an opportunity for you to really enjoy that family at the table for math time, instead of trying to do 4 different math curriculums or 3 different math curriculums, depending on what you were doing with your 4-year-old. So if you want to get some specific information about what's available and where to find it, if you email the math map at classicalconversations.com, Babs or Shauna will be happy to connect you with that information and tell you exactly where to find all of those resources.
Okay, so do I not purchase additional math curriculum for my younger students?
So some of them right now, because we're the way that we're releasing them, some, depending on the ages of your students, some of the domains are not yet available for purchase. And so those domains that are not yet available for purchase can actually be downloaded from CC Connected through the companion. And so that's why if you were to email them in, they could sit there and actually help you match which domain would fit which student, or you might just choose to do all naturals, which is still in a downloadable state. So they're going to help you know which ones. If you said, oh, I would really like fractions, that would be one you would purchase. But if you said, no, I think we're going to just use naturals, they would be able to help you find where that's downloadable. So.
Okay, thank
Does
you.
that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. I will email them and get going on that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a quick question. This morning, I appreciate, Leigh, your example of the analogy for the I2 pages being like the topics to know, and then the I3 pages being like the chart being like the main, like the map of the countries, the actual things to know. So my quick question, maybe as a tutor for Challenge B this year is, and also as a mom, would you recommend, like you guys talked about, like drilling the flashcards and mix and match just as each family see fit? Or as a tutor, would you recommend me like pulling out specific cards from notations, from from a various decks that would mirror the key grammar for each lesson? And would you even recommend us identifying those key vocab or key, the definitions, the things that we're defining for each lesson? Or is that overthinking it?
Well, I think we recommend that you don't do the flashcards in seminar, that you do the games that we suggested. Here's why.
Okay.
I always try to have our tutors do things that might seem a little too hard for a parent to get them introduced to what's going on. And most parents know how to flip flashcards, but most of them maybe haven't played N to K or done all the, Kirsty's shown us so many card games that we could play. And then we have our integer game. So I would just recommend you stick with that schedule rather than do what you just said. But at home for your own kids, it's up to you, Karen.
Okay, so it just helped me kind of hone in this analogy that really was eye-opening for me today. You know how back in Foundation's history sentences, we would have like references to specific timeline cards, right, where there's expansion of the information. So would you say, so I'm just trying to, for my own brain, like pick out, okay, the key grammar for each lesson, even though this is going to be, built over the years. Am I right to say it's mostly coming from the chart versus from the I pages, since the I pages are more
Yeah.
like Okay.
Yeah, I would say chart first. Would you say, Kirsty?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've sort of, the analogy that we've used, if you think of Henley, you have your grammar book, and then you have that has all the rules and all the grammar, and then you have your exercise book that maybe explains a little bit of it and has the exercises for the students. The charts are somewhat analogous to that grammar book,
Grammar.
where here's all the information, and the lessons try to unpack that. And so when we first started, when we first sat down, that big map was what we put together, and then honing in on sort of the inset maps. What do we need for each of those different topics? What do we know? What's the essential things that we really need to know? And wrestling a little bit back and forth over that in order to get that right for our for the charts. There was times where I might think, oh, we really have to have this, or Leigh would say, no, we really have to have this. And God is great, because he would sort of find space for all of these ideas to fit in. But there's a density there. And so Leigh has pulled out some of the things that she thinks this is going to be helpful if it's a little bit less dense as a step in, right? A little bit less information. So if people are looking for something that's a little bit of a gentler guide, those iPages form that gentler guide. But eventually, over time, that first year you look at those charts and it's overwhelming. But over time, as you look at those charts, you're going to suddenly think, oh, now they're not as overwhelming anymore because I'm becoming familiar with them. And so that's where those iPages are sort of an in-between step between I know nothing and I'm a master of the charts. They're an in-between step, I think, where Leigh's tried to make that information a little bit more accessible.
Okay, thank you so much. And one follow-up question on that. So in terms of, you know how in the challenge guide, we have this highlighting system, right? Blue is for highlighting memorable things or worthwhile things. So for at home or even community, like so for a student going through the second time, challenge B, would you encourage them to, okay, maybe work with the chart and highlight things that that's now jumping out as the grammar that they are wrestling and becoming more familiar. I just have kids in classes that want to highlight, that want to interact with pages. So what would you guys recommend for
I
those who
think
want
that's
to
a
do that?
great way to use the charts is to highlight. And even a year over year, that's a great way to assess. And you could even just use two colors. You could make it, I'm going to highlight the things that I feel really confident about, and I'm going to highlight something else that I want to know more about. So you might simplify the highlighting on the charts.
Okay.
And pick two things or three things, whatever the parents wanted to do. But I think that's one way that you can look, because next year what they highlight hopefully will be different. And so you can actually see that growth year after year as they're highlighting the things that they're confident about, or the things that they're, what do you want to learn this year? That's a great way to assess their learning year after year.
That's super helpful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, something that just this morning I did, because I'm always in Kirsty's charts every day. And this is an example of something easy but meaningful. So I was looking at chart 9, and there was this equation that had capital letters for coefficients. And then I was looking at chart 19, and there was a similar equation that had lowercase letters for coefficients. And I went, huh, did Kirsty make a mistake? Do I not understand the problem? Because just even the nuances, like this math curriculum is teaching me to see. I would not have even noticed whether they were capitals or lower cases before working on these charts with her and trying to do the instructions. And so to me, that's at my old age now, to me, that is a much more important skill that I wish I had worked on with my children, was teaching them to see, to compare, to define, to know, rather than getting the work done.
Yes,
Which
absolutely.
makes the
To
calculation,
observe,
right? Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, we're
Mhm.
teaching our kids to
Me
pay
too.
attention. And then the math, you know what, and because once you start to do that, the math gets a lot easier if you just pay attention. So
Perfect.
so that's my highlight when she gets home or when she gets to work again. There's a little, I don't highlight, I tab, otherwise she'd yell at me for messing her charts up. There's a tab on there saying, why?
Mm,
And that's
mm,
what we would love our challenge for students to be doing that last year
mhm,
is just going through those charts saying, but why is it this way? I understand it to be this. Where am
mm.
I right? Where am I wrong? Where do I improve in my understanding? Wouldn't that be great if that's all we did all the time?
Sounds wonderful.
Thanks, Karen. Those are great questions.
Thank you, guys.
All right, well, a couple minutes left. If anybody has any more questions, otherwise, thank you so much for being here with us today, and we'll look forward to talking about comparison next week with lesson 3.